In less than 8 minutes, get the key takeaways from 1 hour long The Bulwark podcast with David French, hosted by Mona Charen on February 24th, 2025. From Trump's love for dictators to MAGA's weaponization of power, this summary uncovers shocking truths you can't afford to miss. Stay till the end. You won't believe some of what's happening. Here are the key takeaways from the podcast. Takeaway 1. MAGA projects its own actions onto others. One of the most effective strategies of MAGA is accusing others of doing exactly what they themselves are doing. If they say the justice system is being weaponized, it usually means they are the ones using it as a weapon. If they cry about election fraud, they are likely setting up ways to undermine democracy themselves. For example, when the Department of Justice, led by a Democratic administration, indicted a Democratic governor, MAGA still called it weaponization. This was despite the fact that it showed the justice system was working fairly, punishing lawbreakers regardless of their party. Meanwhile, when Trump installs his personal lawyer at the Justice Department and starts going after political opponents, MAGA supporters act as if that is completely normal. This pattern of flipping reality on its head happens over and over again. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 2. Trump's admiration for strongmen is a problem. Trump has a long history of cozying up to authoritarian leaders while treating America's Democratic allies with hostility. He seems to see himself as part of an exclusive club of strongmen rather than as the leader of a democratic nation. For example, he has repeatedly praised Vladimir Putin, Kim Jong-un, and other dictators who rule with an iron fist. He even invited Putin to visit the United States again, despite Putin being a wanted war criminal. Meanwhile, Trump has gone out of his way to insult countries like Canada, Mexico, and Germany, nations that have been America's closest allies for decades. It is as if he wants to turn enemies into friends and friends into enemies, creating a world where democracy is weakened while authoritarianism grows stronger. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 3. America's alliances are at risk. Trump and his allies have been undermining NATO and the international order that the U.S. helped build after World War II. Instead of reinforcing democratic alliances, they are pushing European countries away and indirectly helping authoritarian regimes like Russia and China. For example, at the Munich Security Conference, the U.S. Vice President did not even mention Russia's invasion of Ukraine, even though it is one of the most pressing issues in global politics. Instead, he criticized European policies on free speech, acting as if that was the biggest problem at hand. This sent a message to the world that the U.S. is no longer leading the fight against aggression and dictatorship. Meanwhile, Russia and China continue expanding their influence, knowing that Trump's leadership will not stand in their way. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 4. MAGA fears the enemy within more than actual threats. Many in the MAGA movement see wokeness and liberal values as a bigger threat than hostile foreign powers. They focus more on fighting domestic opponents than confronting real international dangers. For example, J.D. Vance said that the thing he worries about most regarding Europe is not Russia or China, but the threat from within. He is more concerned about progressive ideas in Europe than an actual invasion by a nuclear-armed dictatorship. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 5. Trump is extremely easy to manipulate. Far from being a master strategist, Trump is actually very easy to manipulate, especially by authoritarian leaders who know how to flatter him and play into his ego. For example, Russia and China have learned that they can steer Trump by simply praising him or making him feel like a member of their club. Meanwhile, America's Democratic allies struggle to get his attention because they do not stroke his ego enough. We're halfway through the video. Thank you for sticking with us this far. If you're enjoying it, please give us a thumbs up and share it in your WhatsApp groups. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below. To see more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 6. Trump is testing how much lawbreaking he can get away with. The Trump administration is already engaging in illegal actions, openly daring the courts to stop them. The scary part is that some MAGA-aligned legal figures are already making arguments to justify ignoring court rulings. For example, Trump's allies have started saying that district courts do not actually have the power to block the president's actions. They are laying the groundwork for him to simply ignore the Supreme Court if it ever rules against him. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 7. The presidential pardon power is a huge problem. The founders may have made a mistake by giving the president such broad power to pardon criminals. Trump has already used this power to protect his allies, and he could use it even more aggressively this time around. For example, at the end of his term, he could simply pardon everyone who commits crimes on his behalf. That means his inner circle could break laws without fear, knowing that they will be protected in the end. This could lead to a period of lawlessness with no accountability. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 8. MAGA thrives on hate. MAGA is not just a political movement, it is fueled by hatred toward perceived enemies. This hatred is not just directed at Democrats, but also at moderate conservatives who do not support Trump. For example, David French, a lifelong conservative, faced more threats and abuse from fellow conservatives for opposing Trump than he ever did from leftists in his career. MAGA's internal culture is built around punishing anyone who does not fully submit to the movement. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 9. The Republican Congress has surrendered its power. One of the biggest reasons Trump can act like an autocrat is because Republican lawmakers are letting him. Instead of using their constitutional power to check him, they have become his enablers. For example, in theory, Congress is the most powerful branch of government. But in practice, Republicans in Congress have chosen to let Trump do whatever he wants. They act as if their own power depends on serving him rather than serving the country. Now let's move to the last takeaway. Takeaway 10. Civic ignorance is Trump's biggest weapon. Trump's return to power was not just because of Biden's mistakes. A major factor was that many voters are simply uninformed and easily manipulated by misinformation. For example, data shows that people who closely followed the news tended to vote against Trump, while those who paid no attention to politics at all were much more likely to vote for him. Trump benefits from confusion, misinformation, and the fact that many people do not know what is really going on. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this summary of the Charen podcast with David French informative. If you're interested in learning more about these topics, I encourage you to watch the full podcast on YouTube by clicking on the link in the description below. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like below and share this video in your WhatsApp groups. You can also discuss about this video by commenting below. To get more such videos in your timeline, press the subscribe button below.